Hello, I'm Eleanor, an undergraduate researcher at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. I work under Dr. Saikawa in the Environmental Sciences Department to study air pollution in Atlanta. So what is environmental justice? Let's learn with Air Emory, a subset of Saikawa Lab. Environmental justice is the movement in response to environmental racism. Environmental racism is the phenomenon of minority populations being disproportionately exposed to all types of pollution, natural disasters, and environmental harm. This happens because poor and minority populations can be taken advantage of by companies that dump waste or emit toxic air pollution near their neighborhoods. Often, white, affluent voices are listened to when they protest an undesirable development in their neighborhood. These people are known as the Not in My Backyard movement, or NIMBYs. However, these undesirable developments have to end up in someone's backyard, and it is most often those with the least power in society. Black people often end up in these situations because decades of discrimination have left them with fewer resources to fight back against businesses and/or the government. Black people's concerns are often not taken as seriously by government agencies. Whether by subconscious or conscious discrimination, their voices are devalued. This leads to lax environmental regulations and ignored safety protocols in disadvantaged neighborhoods. The structural racism in the United States makes environmental racism possible. Those involved in environmental justice movements fight against these disparities. Environmental justice is a combination of several tributaries that have come together to form a stream of activists fighting for common goals. The tributaries include the civil rights movement, the anti-toxics movement, or people who fought against toxic waste being dumped in Black neighborhoods, those in academia who formally study trends of environmental justice through empirical studies, or who teach college classes on the subject, Native American rights activism, since many Native American issues overlap with environmental justice, and finally, traditional environmentalists, although this group is historically white and often ignored the environmental problems of Black communities. But some traditional environmentalists took an intersectional approach and joined environmental justice causes. All of these movements converged into what we know today as environmental justice. Environmental justice was picking up steam in the late 70s and early 80s. Dr. Robert Bullard is a sociology professor who has become known as the father of environmental justice. In 1978, he helped sue the state of Texas and a landfill company to block their intent to build a landfill in a middle-class Black neighborhood in Houston. By helping with this case, Dr. Bullard realized that 100% of the city's landfills were located in Black neighborhoods, even though Houston's population was only 25% Black at the time. After getting his start in 1978, he has gone on to write 18 books on the subject, found the Environmental Justice Resource Center at Clark Atlanta University, and found the historically Black College and University Climate Change Consortium. Recently, he was selected for the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. In 2020, he also gave a presentation through Emory Climate Talks, and his slides are available in a link in the description. So, what are the key ideas of the environmental justice movement? According to Dr. Bullard, those who fight for environmental justice believe all communities are entitled to equal protection in housing, transportation, employment, and energy. We believe everyone has a right to equal protection, equal access, and equal enforcement, and everyone has the right to live in a neighborhood that's not overpolluted, a neighborhood where your kids can play outside on the playground that's not next to a refinery or a chemical plant. Environmental justice has made it into the news more often than you might think. Here are some examples that you may or may not have heard of. The first is 1982 Warren County, North Carolina, which is recognized as the first environmental justice protest. The county is in rural North Carolina, and the population was mostly Black and low income. The state government decided to dump contaminated soil containing PCBs at a landfill in this community. PCBs were part of many everyday objects until they were banned in 1979. They're known to cause cancer, and the locals were worried about them leaching into their drinking water supply. Protesters met the trucks carrying the toxic waste, lay down in the street, and held protests for weeks. In the end, though, the state won and PCBs were dumped in Warren County's landfill. The second case is Cancer Alley in Louisiana. Cancer Alley is an area from Baton Rouge to New Orleans with a high concentration of petrochemical plants, which manufacture things like styrofoam and neoprene. This area is also majority black and low income and has some of the most toxic air pollution in America. The chemical plants take advantage of these communities by providing them with low-wage jobs, leaving them powerless to fight back for risk of losing their livelihood. Using the EPA's risk screening environmental indicators model, ProPublica found that the Cancer Alley area called St. Gabriel has higher concentrations of cancer-causing chemicals in the air than 99% of the country. Residents are exposed to carcinogenic chemicals such as chloroprene, ethylene oxide, benzene, butadiene, and others. Locals throughout the region have been protesting for years, especially against proposals to construct new plants. Next, in 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit Louisiana. Due to a variety of reasons fueled by structural racism, Black people lived in the parts of the city with the weakest protection against flooding. When the storm hit, the levees failed, and Black neighborhoods were hit hardest by the hurricane. The response from local, state, and federal government was weak, and many of these communities never recovered from their housing being totally destroyed, community members being permanently dislocated, and many of their neighbors dying. In 2014, the Flint water crisis gained national attention. The city of Flint, Michigan made the decision to switch the source of the city's drinking water to the Flint River. Residents quickly realized from the bad color, smell, taste of the water, and experiencing new hair loss and skin rashes from bathing with the water, that it was contaminated. It turns out that the water was contaminated with lead, which is very harmful to humans, especially children. Lead poisoning causes physical and mental health problems and developmental issues for children. In Flint, the majority of the population is Black, and almost half of all residents live below the poverty line. These residents banded together, protested, and sued the government to take action on the contaminated water. The government was forced to provide residents of Flint with bottled water, which they relied on for bathing and drinking until 2018. Although the situation has slightly improved, the lead pipes have not been replaced, and the damages of lead poisoning cannot be undone. Finally, in 2020, COVID-19 hit America. The pandemic has hit the African American population especially hard, and many experts are theorizing that this is intertwined with environmental racism. Since Black Americans have been disproportionately exposed to air pollution for decades before the pandemic, they are now experiencing worse symptoms and higher mortality from COVID. Can you think of any stories you've heard from your community or around the globe which involve environmental injustices? Now let's turn to Atlanta, our community. So how do environmental injustices occur in cities like Atlanta? It can happen in many ways. Atlanta is known for its sprawl into the suburbs. Atlanta's economic development is concentrated in these white suburbs instead of the city center with a larger Black population, and it's not an accident that white areas are more highly valued by developers and investors. As a result, the majority of Metro Atlantans have to commute to work using the highways. Many of these highways, like I-20, were purposely built through Black neighborhoods, which means that communities were disrupted and the residents have to breathe worse air from constant traffic. The highway can also serve as a boundary for redlining, or housing segregation. This is a practice where real estate agents subtly reinforce racism in the way they sell and rent houses to Black people. Even though segregation was outlawed, these discriminatory housing practices carry on and contribute to worse living situations and more exposure to pollution for Black Americans. In fact, a study by Greenlaw found that the highest correlation for high pollution exposure in Atlanta was the race of those living in the area. The Hartsfield-Jackson Airport is also a source of environmental racism, with the populations around the Atlanta airport being majority non-white. They are exposed to airplane fumes and horrible noise pollution. Even efforts to provide green outdoor spaces can cause problems. For example, the development of the Atlanta Beltline has caused property prices in the surrounding area to go up. This makes sense since the Beltline is a popular attraction and there is a high demand to live near it. Unfortunately, the residents who lived in the area before the Beltline was built were poor Black Atlantans who have been forced out of their community by high property prices. This is known as eco-gentrification. When developers build an attractive, eco-friendly, or green space, prices go up, and the original residents are forced out, leaving affluent white people to enjoy the amenities. Now we can answer, how does Air Emory connect to environmental justice? As members of the Atlanta community, we provide information to other members of our community. This information empowers them to know the quality of the air that they are breathing. The data we collect could eventually inform local policymakers when setting air pollution regulations or evaluating which areas in Atlanta need improvement. Finally, we participate in community outreach by visiting local middle school classes to teach them about air quality. I hope you learned a lot about environmental justice today. Thanks for watching.